I'm Tim McVeigh, Vice President and General Manager of WSB-TV, here at the Center for Civil and Human Rights in downtown Atlanta. Tonight, we look back at one of the critical moments in the struggle for civil rights, the 1965 Bloody Sunday March in Selma, Alabama. From our WSB archives, we've uncovered rarely seen video and interviews from those historic marches in Selma. We've also put some of this material on our website, WSB-TV.com, and we'll have additional coverage on Channel 2 Action News. Right now, you can join Fred Blankenship and the entire Channel 2 Action News team on Twitter for a discussion about the show. We invite you and your family to watch this important primetime special.
The 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday.
The major said, "Troopers, advance." You saw these men putting on their gas masks. They came toward us.
Congressman John Lewis, one of the last surviving members of that historic march. Now, join us for Return to Selma, a Channel 2 special with Fred Blankenship.
We're in Selma, Alabama, at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. 50 years ago, this was the site of a historic march, which came to be known as Bloody Sunday. Georgia Congressman John Lewis led hundreds of demonstrators to this bridge. Tonight, Lewis returns to Selma, and in an emotional first-hand account, he recalls the brutal assault on this bridge in 1965 and how it dramatically changed the course of the civil rights movement. Since 1939, the Edmund Pettus Bridge has arched high over the Alabama River. Edmund Pettus was a powerful Confederate general, U.S. Senator, and Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. Today, the bridge, which still bears his name, is a monument to one of the most painful chapters in the 1965 fight for voting rights.
Be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly.
How do you feel when you come back here 50 years later?
Well, to come back here 50 years later, I feel like I'm standing on almost a sacred spot. Some of us gave a little blood on this bridge 50 years ago. Some of us almost died on that bridge for the right to vote, for the right to participate in the democratic process. So it's very special for me. People suffered on this bridge. Men, women, and young children.
Now, you said that when you face your biggest fear, when you confront it, there's really nothing to be afraid of at that point.
You come to that point where you're not afraid. You lose all sense of fear. And you find something that is so right and so precious. You're prepared to give everything you have for it.
About 2 hours from Selma is John Lewis's hometown, Troy, Alabama. His father was a sharecropper. Lewis and his siblings worked on this farm.
Right here, sir.
Lewis sat down with me and looked back on his childhood in the South. You saw life a certain way, and then one day in Troy, Alabama, you saw how your father was treated one day. And that's when you saw a difference in the world.
Well, I saw how my father, my uncles, my grandparents, and others were being treated. I saw the signs that said white, colored. White men, white women, colored women. To go downtown to the little town of Troy on a Saturday afternoon to the theater, all of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony, and all of the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. I would come home and ask my mother, ask my father, my grandparents why, and they would say, "That's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble."
As a teenager, while listening to the radio, Lewis heard a different answer to his questions about race. That voice was Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
And he was speaking a sermon, delivering a sermon, talking about American Christians. As Christians in America, you don't have to segregate yourself. He said it's not in keeping with our faith that we can do better. And he inspired me. So I wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote me back, sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket, and invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. I didn't tell my mother, my father, any of my sisters or brothers, any of my teachers that I sent this letter to Dr. King. And I saw Dr. King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk in a little office. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?" I was so scared. I said, "Dr. King, I'm John Robert Lewis." They gave my whole name. "I'm John Robert Lewis." And he started calling me the boy from Troy. And during that time, we became like brothers.
Lewis devoted himself to the movement, appearing with King and Abernathy at news conferences.
But it is immoral to urge people to accept injustices, oppression, and second-class citizenship in an attempt to wait until the so-called opportune time. The time is always right to do right.
Lewis joined the Freedom Riders, civil rights activists who worked to integrate bus terminals in southern states. He sat at segregated lunch counters. Lewis rallied during the day and at night. He was spit on, beaten, arrested, and jailed many times. At the height of the movement, Lewis led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He represented the group while helping to plan the 1963 March on Washington, joining other leaders in meetings with President Kennedy. And Lewis was the youngest person to speak at the historic march.
It is true that we support the administration's civil rights bill. We support it with great reservation, however. Unless Title III is put in this bill, there's nothing to protect the young children and old women who must face police dogs and fire hoses in the South while they engage in peaceful demonstration.
After that massive demonstration, Dr. King intensified efforts to get federal protection for blacks in the Deep South who were denied the right to vote.
As you know, we are assembled here today to reaffirm our determination to gain the right to vote in Selma, in Dallas County, and all over the state of Alabama.
March 7th, 1965. What did you do leading up to the march? What was your role?
I was in Atlanta late Saturday night, March 6th, discussing and debating with my colleagues in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Some people said we should march, others said we should not. I took the position that we had been in Selma since 1962. We have been arrested in 63 and 64. The people wanted to march, and we should march.
This march intends to keep off the highway. We will be marching on the shoulder of the road and will not in any way be interfering with the pursuit of traffic.
And the young came and said a prayer. We stood up. We got off our knees and lined up in twos and started walking in an orderly fashion with Jose Williams and myself leading the walk through the streets of Selma. We get to the edge of the bridge. Jose asked me, he said, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No." I said, "What about you?" He said, "A little." And I said something like, "Well, there's too much water there. We're not going to jump. We're going forward." We continued to walk. We came to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama State Troopers. We came within hearing distance of the state troopers.
To be detrimental to your safety to continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly. You have to disperse. You are ordered to disperse, go home, or go to your church.
You saw these men putting on their gas masks. The major said, troopers, advance.
Troopers here, advance.
They came toward us. Beating us with nightsticks, trampling us with horses, releasing the tear gas. I thought I was going to down that bridge. I thought I saw death. 50 years later, I don't recall how I made it back across the bridge, through the streets of Selma, back to the little church. I do recall being back at the church. I don't know how I made it back. Apparently someone carried me. People broke cars and I know ambulance to transport us. Early the next morning, Monday morning, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Ralph Abernathy came by to visit me in my hospital bed. And Dr. King said, John, don't worry. More people will be coming to Selma to support us. And he said, we will make it from Selma to Montgomery. And he was right.
How were you not angry? How did you not want to strike back?
I made up my mind years ago that I would not become bitter. And understanding that for this cause, I may have to give my life, that I was willing to be arrested, to go to jail. Mm-hmm. So this was just another step on a very long journey to redeem the soul of America.
The Bloody Sunday March pushed Selma into the national spotlight. What happened next in the deadly battle for voting rights?
We have the right to walk to Montgomery if our feet can get us there.
Congressman Lewis takes me to the bridge that will forever be linked to his legacy. And the bold steps the President of the United States took to stop the bloodshed in Selma. That's coming up when Return to Selma continues.
Return to Selma is a family-to-family special brought to you by Scana Energy, Kroger, Southwest Airlines, Northside Hospital, and American Signature Furniture. Return to Selma, a Channel 2 special now continues with Fred Blankenship, reporting from Selma, Alabama.
This is the 50th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday March. That demonstration for voting rights took place there on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It ended when Georgia Congressman John Lewis and hundreds of other civil rights marchers were attacked by heavily armed police. Now, as Return to Selma continues, Congressman Lewis talks about how that protest changed his life and why the fight for voting rights is far from over. Do you think that your history is always going to be linked to this bridge where we're standing right now?
Well, I cannot forget what happened, and I played a small role in walking across this bridge with about 600 other people.
When I see the video of you at the foot of the bridge, you didn't move, you didn't flinch. What were you thinking at that moment when they were coming up to you, when they were screaming at you?
I thought we would be arrested and that we would be taken to jail. I didn't have any idea that we would be beaten, tear gas, and trampled by horses. I was prepared to go to jail. I was wearing a backpack, and in this backpack I had 2 books, 1 apple and 1 orange. I wanted to have something to read and something to eat. I had toothpaste and a toothbrush. I wanted to be able to brush my teeth.
Just 2 days after that 1965 assault on Selma marchers who were demonstrating for voting rights, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, and many religious leaders marched to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. They prayed there, and that night, a white minister, Reverend James Reeb, was attacked by segregationists. He died from his injuries.
I wish for a moment that we would bow in a word of silent prayer for these brothers who came here to be with us today and who marched with us across the Alabama River, who marched to witness for freedom and to witness for their own personal dedication to the cause of justice.
The brutal violence in Selma was seen around the world. President Lyndon Johnson appeared on television to address the Congress and the nation.
What happened in Selma is part of a far larger movement which reaches into every section and state of America. It is the effort of American Negroes to secure for themselves the full blessings of American life. Their cause must be our cause too, because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice.
Days after the president's speech and under the protection of Alabama's National Guard, Dr. King, John Lewis, and thousands of others marched 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery. It took them several days to complete the journey. At the Alabama Capitol, Dr. King delivered his famous "How long?" speech. "5 months later, President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act into law. The president gave Dr. King one of the pens he used to sign the bill." What kind of historic moment was that for you?
When the Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, it was so meaningful. Many of us shouted for joy. And then when President Lyndon Johnson signed that act on August 6, 1965, we said it was worth it. The blood, the beating, the jailing, it was all worth it.
Under the Voting Rights Act, states that had a history of voter discrimination had to get federal approval in order to change their election laws. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that section of the act was unconstitutional. Now, President Barack Obama has asked Congress to reinstate that provision. Do you think that's going to happen?
When that decision came down, I wanted to cry because so many people had suffered. Too many people had died. And I wanted to say to some members of the courts that you never had to stand in unmovable lines. You never had to pass a literacy test or count the number of bubbles in a bar of soap, the number of jelly beans in a jar. We're going to fix it. We're going to bring members of Congress to Selma to walk across the bridge, to understand, to feel, to see what happened.
If you have been criticized for one thing, it is that you are too optimistic.
Well, I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic. You have to have this sense of hope, the sense of optimism. To lose hope, it's like you don't exist. You have to have hope and faith to continue to move and to believe that we can make it.
If you can give one charge to the American people, to stand up, to do something, to do what's right, what would you say?
My word will be simple. Do your best. Be strong. Be faithful. And never, ever give in or give up.
Next on Return to Selma, the video we showed Congressman Lewis and his surprise reaction. During my interview with Congressman Lewis, we showed him some video we discovered in the Channel 2 archives.
This is my first time really seeing the video, but I remember exactly. The first scene is during the Freedom Ride. Is in the home of Reverend and Mrs. Abernathy, Ralph Abernathy. And I remember it so well. We were holding a press conference, and then there's another scene from sitting at a lunch counter.
What stands out to you, especially about that first scene?
Young, just a boy, being there in the presence of Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy. It's amazing to me. The scene in the White House, I've never seen this before. I've seen still photograph. I wonder where did you get this from? Standing there with Martin Luther King Jr., President Kennedy, A. Philip Randolph.
John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, a sharecropper's son, a champion of civil rights, a hero to so many, not just where we are, but across this country and across this world of ours. How would you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as some barefooted child growing up in rural Alabama, picking cotton, gathering peanuts, pulling corn, who's just trying to help out to make things better.